Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and along with Asbed Bedrossian, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: Putin and Pashinyan meeting, Constitutional Court challenge, forging steel out of velvet, and the Groong podcast's Year in Review.
And to talk about these issues, we have with us Asbed Kotchikian, who is an associate professor of political science and international relations at the American University of Armenia. Hello and welcome, Asbed.
Hello, Asbed. Hello, Hovik. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Hi, Asbed. Hi, Asbed.
Hi, everyone. On July 7th, Pashinyan held discussions with Putin in Moscow. The Russian president paid some boilerplate compliments to Pashinyan, congratulating him on the election victory, saying that the solutions to the complex and sensitive problems facing Armenia need the trust of the people in their government, and that the elections showed that Pashinyan had that trust. Implicitly, we heard that he was saying, it's time to deliver on the November agreement, so let's get on with business. Asbed Kotchikian, did Pashinyan propose any projects to Putin, and how to proceed with Aliyev on the many issues facing them? Did you have any takeaways from this meeting?
Right. It's really a tough one. Like a couple of things before we go on, I think we need to keep in mind that the symbolism is very important, right? And the fact that this is the first visit of Pashinyan, the first visit that he made is to Russia, it tells you something about the orientation and the place of Moscow in Armenia's policy, but specifically in the case of Pashinyan. There are a couple of things here that need to be also kept in mind. And that is, first of all, before the visit, there has been a lot of chatter in Armenia about the possibility of having Russian troops deployed along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border. I'm not talking about Karabakh, but Armenia-Azerbaijan border, which the Russian spokespeople officially denied that there is such a thing, that's such a discussion going on. But I wouldn't put past them that there must have been some kind of an allusion to that, or some kind of a reference to that. Of course, the main issue remains the November agreement, as you mentioned, and how can it be implemented, and how can Russia actually play an active role in "quote unquote" defending Armenia's interests in this context, which is a bit disconcerting, right? That you have to rely on Russia completely on your border security, but at the same time, in terms of also taking any initiative regarding your foreign policy, but sometimes even domestic politics. Now, within this whole context, what has been not said is very difficult to analyze. What hasn't been said, or what hasn't been announced. But it seems that the couple of things that came up was that, we're happy that the November agreement, Russia is adamant about supporting it, or implementing it, and so on. But of course, it always goes back to the economy. At some point, that has been highlighted that Armenian exports to Russia have increased, which in itself doesn't mean much. Armenia, with its small market and small economy, doesn't make much of a difference on Russia's large, giant economic actions. So I think these were some of the key takeaways. I think it was Putin's cementing his sort of control over Pashinyan and over Armenia, and trying to move forward. Find a way forward in the coming years.
Asbed, we keep talking about the November agreement, but is there something beyond that is at play? Because a lot of the political chatter in Armenia is also about a potential peace treaty with Azerbaijan that includes recognition of. I mean, we talked about demarcation, delimitation of borders, but I think that a peace treaty would have to come first. Do you think that developments that are not explicitly in the November 9 agreement are also possible?
Well, Hovik, when you say a peace treaty, I'd like to ask, does that include a Karabakh issue also? Is the Artsakh issue part of the peace treaty? Because if you are going to include that, then a border demarcation cannot really come before that, because it predetermines the status of Karabakh inside Azerbaijan.
Well, Asbed, you made the right point. You raised the right point, and with Hovik's statement, or what Hovik asked, I think that is a very, very good point in terms of finishing up the border, or finalizing the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Obviously, assumes that the issue of Karabakh has also been solved from the Azerbaijani and Armenian perspective, that it will remain an autonomous quote unquote region under the control of Russia or under the protection of Russia with a narrow connection with Armenia and so on and so forth. But the peace treaty component is really, really problematic because listen, we talk about agreements, and this is the weird thing about the November agreement. It is an agreement that can go on so many different vectors, right? It has the element of opening up borders and transportation corridors and so on, which is not only about passage through Zangezur, Goris, but also possible border opening with Turkey, Armenian-Turkish border. So I am not, again, this is something that is so problematic because A, you do not have a foreign policy institution that you can actually look at and analyze to see what they're saying, what are the messages or the signals being sent. Everything is handled by the Prime Minister's office, the acting Prime Minister's
Right.
office in this case. But all of those are up in the air. I find it problematic when people start making analyses about, based on things that are not common. Either you know something, you have information, so divulge those information and make an analysis based on that, or just shut the hell up, because you cannot figure out what it is. That's why
Yeah.
I'm quite cautious in these analyses, because again, you can only analyze what is being said or who's saying it and so on.
Well, a lot of the meeting with Putin was not open. I think a whole bunch of things were discussed over lunch, which is, I've read, somewhat unusual for Putin to do. But I think we've basically heard the tip of the iceberg of those discussions. And when you say
Oh,
agreement,
absolutely, and
Asbed, the,
yes.
the problem with the agreement, the November agreement, is that you and I, and people we know don't really know the scope of the agreement, right? There's stuff that's written, but there's a lot of stuff apparently that we just don't know much about.
Absolutely. This goes back again to the issue is that, if you're going to make assessments, you cannot make assessments based on what is not written. You have to have the facts to make any analysis. You can make speculations. And it is possible, absolutely possible, that there are addenda on in the November agreement that are not made public. But speculation at this point, I think it's an exercise in futility, mostly because we don't know. We can speculate that the enclaves are going to be returned, the Armenian enclaves, the Azerbaijani enclaves, and so on. The road here, the border here, and so on and so forth. Maybe there is a timeline in an addendum there about that in a year or so, border with Turkey will open, or this or that will happen. So this is the frustrating part, for observers. Unless you are able to really delve into this, you basically immerse yourself in trying to see every single statement made by so and so leader or not so much of a leader. It's impossible to paint the larger picture, to see the larger picture. But it is concerning, right? When you mention about the symbolism, right? When it comes to having discussion over lunch and having discussions over lunch with Pashinyan, that also tells you something about how Putin is viewing Pashinyan and how he's actually trying to also to appease him. Not just
Right.
that, okay, I have you from your bowls now, I can do whatever I want with you, but also, no, he's careful, he knows.
Hmm.
And this is the hallmark of Russian foreign policy, that they don't want to push people or countries and so on to the edge where they would actually react. Put enough pressure on them that they actually would comply, but not enough for them to say, screw it, I'm not going to take this anymore, and I'm going to turn to the west or to other side or whatnot.
There are a lot of statements made about hidden addenda and, of course, denials of them. What I'm concerned about is that implicitly each side of the agreement is assuming certain things that the others don't necessarily subscribe to. For example, the whole narrative that Aliyev has tried to establish around corridors, right? These
Right.
could be just transit rights, which is a simple,
Hmm.
your trucks can go over our roads, maybe
Right.
with or without tariffs or something like that. Or it could be assumed there will be issues of sovereignty. And the fact
Right.
that, over the last few days, in fact, this past week, Aliyev has established two new, I'm not sure what they're called, areas, let's say, right? And one of them is called
Yeah.
the East Zangezur, right? Which presumes that there's a West Zangezur, and therefore
Right.
they're trying to basically start softening up the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia in a way that is putting a lot of pressure on the Armenian government to make concessions, and we just don't know what those things are.
Right. No, I mean, these are all factors. You have to also, when we're thinking about this, it's also interesting to see what other countries are doing, right? This is what, again, trying to see a larger picture. There is this misconception, or not misconception, let's call it a rigid analysis, or an analysis based on habits, that we always look at things as
Mm-hmm.
enemies, friends, or we look at, for instance, that countries can only be allies or can only work in international organizations or in formal alliance. And what I'm specifically referring to here is about Russian-Turkish relations, and what is Turkey trying to do in this context,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we keep talking about alliances, there is no alliance between Turkey and Russia. There is animosity between them. There is this and that and that. But if you look at it closely, you'd see that it's actually more tactical and strategic cooperation rather than an alliance. It's because an alliance limits you in terms of how you can actually get out of that agreements. But
It,
a strategic and a tactical sort of cooperation gives you flexibility to cooperate on some fronts, yet not on others.
uh, uh,
So, for instance, like 2 weeks ago, sorry, Asbed, let me just say this as well. 2 weeks ago, Russia, Iran, and Turkey on June 25th, I think they were in Kazakhstan. They in a meeting in Kazakhstan, they agreed on a new strategy or a continued strategy to fight ISIL in Syria. Okay, so
yeah.
now these three countries, Armenia and the Caucasus is not the only thing on the minds of these countries, and they do converge in so many other places, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, and so on. So the question should be asked is that we need to ask is, where does the Caucasus fall in that larger sort of strategic and tactical cooperation, and what actions is Turkey taking, or Iran will be taking, in terms of either border opening or how they view Russia deploying troops on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, and so on and so forth. Sorry, I interrupted you,
This is
Asbed.
a
Go
very
ahead.
important point you're making. I completely agree with you. They're not necessarily allies or adversaries. I look at their interactions as a constant interaction, a political dance with each other. And they've had this all the way from the front is all the way extending from Libya all the way to now Afghanistan, right?
Right.
And
And don't forget, sorry, Aspect, I mean, Afghanistan, you raise an interesting point, right? The US withdrew Afghanistan recently,
yes,
and Turkey has been one of the countries that is filling in
well, Turkey
that that
inherited
that
essentially
void, if you want to
control of the
call it. And
Kabul
this
airport.
Exactly. And this is in Russia's backyard. So do you think that Russia, in the last 20 years or so, since 9/11, had no say in the deployment of American Western troops, NATO troops, and whatnot in
Right,
Afghanistan,
right. This
where
is
it
a
had a 10-year of experience? And probably they're laughing in Kremlin, like, okay, we got screwed there for 10 years, but look at you guys, you got screwed there for 20 years. So, this is the strategic thinking that I think lacks in analyses, in most
in in
analyses,
some
including
ways.
mine.
In some ways, it might be looked at as a win for Turkey, trying to establish a greater control and a greater amount of access to the Central Asian Turkish countries. But also, maybe from a Russian perspective, they're looking at how Turkey can get screwed in Afghanistan, just like other superpowers have gotten screwed there.
Right,
It's
right,
it's a little bit
and
like an axe grinder. You put your army there, and you lose 10 years and manpower.
right. Yeah, and one final thing, if I may, about this issue of strategic alliances and partnerships and this and that. We have to also break the mold of looking at things from history's perspective. History is important. History is important to understand events, processes, excuse me, and whatnot. But to define everything, that Russia has always opposed Turkey, or Turkey has always had pan-Turanic ideas, and so on and so forth. We need to break this approach of looking at it. As much as we think, there are a lot of people in Turkey, not a lot, but quite a few, quite a few in number, that advocate for Pan-Turanism, whatever that means.
Yes.
They don't understand it. But the question is, do people in Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan, do they even give a rat's ass about Pan-Turanism and so on? This reminds me in the early 90s, this whole thing about Pan-Turanism was so amplified. And in my research back then, I also started doing research in Central Asian republics. At first, they looked at Turkey as, okay, a big brother that can come in and help us with development and the path towards Western style free market and so on. But they soon realized that they actually have more things to offer to Turkey than Turkey has to offer to them. They have a higher education rate, they had a higher science rate, scientist rates, and so on and so forth. So we need to break that, oh, these poor Central Asian republics are waiting for Turkey to come and colonize them and so on. And I think this also explains why Erdogan has actually focused on Afghanistan, focused in Syria, in Libya, in Eastern Mediterranean, than on Central Asia. And also, don't forget that when no one talks about this, but the Balkans is a major Turkish investment hub. So Turkey is not guided by these ideals of pan-Turanism, ethnic sort of kin solidarity, and so on. By the same token, we shouldn't say that, oh, Russia is going to protect Armenians by all costs because they oppose Turkey or this and that, or looking for the West as a savior. Looking for saviors is a complex
Right.
that has permeated not in just the public opinion, but also in the minds of a lot of analysts.
So, Asbed, at the same time that Pashinyan was meeting with Putin, the EU announced that it's going to invest in Armenia, either through grants or foreign direct investments, for something between 1.6 and 2.6 billion euros in the coming 5 years. Some analysts think that there's a consensus between Russia and the EU about concessions that Armenia needs to make to achieve peace with Turkey and Azerbaijan. So they're preparing the political and the economic, Russia and the EU, the grounds to help Armenia make those concessions. What is the context within which you view the support that these two entities, Russia and the EU, are building to prop up Armenia?
Well, you said it. I mean, in this case, my read is similar to those analyses that you mentioned. And don't forget, right, from the get-go, Sergei Lavrov, in many statements, even during the war, he actually was trying to find a solution under the Russian auspices or
Yeah.
within the OSCE Minsk
Yeah.
process. But at the end, the message that came out very clearly from the November agreement and since then is that, okay, guys, and from Moscow specifically to the West, the solution, the political solution, the military solution is in our hands. You guys have to just rally support, get the money, and make this deal
Hmm.
so that you can actually also get some credit for it. And I think that's the plan. Now it's also interesting to see about the talks, right? We're talking about 1.6 to 2.6 billion euros, about
Yeah.
two and a half $2 billion, $3 billion.
Yeah.
Where is it going to be invested? Is it going to be invested in infrastructure? Is it going to be invested in some of those projects that they have been wasting money on, like the EU projects of judicial reform, this reform, and so on and so forth? I'm not saying that it's a waste. I have to take that back. But, it also tells us where is that investment going to be. Is it investment which can give Armenia some sense of security, whatever that means,
Hmm.
in terms of monitoring stations and so on and so forth?
I
But I
haven't
think
seen
it's
any
that tit
definition
for
yet around
tat.
this.
Exactly. It's that tit for tat. As you mentioned, the dance between Turkey and Russia and Iran, it's a tripartite dance,
Hmm.
whatever dance you can have that way. And this is also a way of coordination and a waltz between Russia and the West, and especially the EU, right? We always have to remember which West we're talking about. We're talking about the EU, not the US.
Yeah.
And Russia is more inclined to work with the EU and it tolerates EU more than it tolerates the US.
A
Let's put it
final
that way.
quick
So,
question about this topic for you. Where does the U.S. come into all this? I mean, we've seen the EU, we've seen Russia. We're talking about those things. The U.S., except for the genocide recognition and getting sort of back into the game, I don't know what they're doing.
well, their only bastion is Georgia. They have been very active in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in the South Caucasus, and I think they're trying to maintain their grip on or their control or influence in that part. I mean, we've talked about this in previous podcasts that because of the political crisis in Georgia, the U.S. was heavily involved. The U.S. ambassador was shuttling between the opposition and government to find a solution, even offering to pay the bail for the opposition leader, and so on and so forth. And also because of U.S. mediation, some about 15 Armenian POWs were released, and they came in back to Armenia via Georgia and so on. They're trying to relegate a
Yes.
role to Georgia through them, and I think they know very well that when it comes to Azerbaijan and Armenia, they have limited, I'm not going to say no influence, but they have very limited influence in terms of swaying opinions and or policy of those governments.
Okay. Thank you so much.
On July 9, the Constitutional Court in Armenia began its hearings on the complaint from four opposition parties challenging the results of the June 20th snap elections. Now, we should mention that despite similar complaints after almost all elections since Armenia's independence in 1991, there has been no precedent for election results being overturned by the High Court. Many analysts believe that the most likely outcome of this will be that the results of the elections will be upheld, especially considering that Nikol Pashinyan and his My Step parliamentary faction were able to make several changes to the makeup of the Constitutional Court, specifically removing three judges, replacing them with more loyal judges. Still, the new constitution passed in 2015 prescribes several different possible outcomes to the election challenges, including obviously leaving the results unchanged, annulling the election results, declaring a runoff, and changing the method of distribution of mandates. Overall, I think this is date number three, and there are some interesting points of the discussions in the Constitutional Court, which they decided to start at 10 a.m. and run until midnight every day. So there's a lot of entertainment if you're interested in stuff like that. But also, this electoral challenge is unprecedented from the perspective that of the number of parties that have joined together to present the challenge, including Hayastan Dashing, Bativunem Dashing, Hayot Hayrenik, and Zartong National Christian Party, which the latter two are smaller parties, but still, Asbed, have you been following the deliberations in the Constitutional Court? Anything noteworthy you can mention about the evidence presented by the opposition and deliberations that happened so far?
Well, unlike you, Hovik, I'm not entertained nor amused with these. Rather, I have been observing and following them absolutely. And it's interesting. There are a couple of that you mentioned, right? Two alliances and two smaller parties. And by the way, one of the smaller parties, the Zartong Party, is actually was headed by the lawyer, the head of the Chamber of Advocates.
Lawyers,
So
yeah,
they do have, this is
yes.
lawyers advocates, yeah, a chamber of advocates, it's called. So obviously it's their domain, so they're taking this into the legal field. And yeah, I'm not expecting anything to happen, but there have been a couple of interesting things. For instance, Armen Sarkisyan, the president, was actually twice. Hrarto Masyan, who's a member of the Constitutional Court, wanted to bring in Armen Sarkisyan as a witness, to be questioned, not questioned, but to be testimony, give a witness testimony. And also, in this whole context, it's interesting that these four parties are bringing in cases. And obviously, if you have in any court, when you have a case brought in, there should be a defendant. In this case, the defendant in this whole process is the Central Electoral Committee, along with the prosecutor's office, the police, and if I'm not mistaken, the TV and Radio Commission as defendants in the case. Now, if you were to look at it, then it's not a case against the government, but the way that the elections were handled. And most of the arguments here are about the use of administrative resources. So this is where the radio and TV commission comes in. If Pashinyan and My Step actually a civil contract pardon, they used administrative resources during the pre-election time or during even the election time. But there's also another interesting thing about the usage of fake IDs and voting twice. According to Aras Orabian of Zartong Party, he actually said that there were over 140 or 104. I'm confusing the number, but around that many sort of cases where people could not vote because their IDs were not registered. Interestingly, including Muguchian, the head of the Central Electoral Committee.
Yes.
Uh, in all of that, this is something that we have discussed separately. I don't know if it was online or off, but there was also an issue brought up that I think it was brought up by Aram Vartevanyan, that the number of 2.5 million voters is actually a bit inflated Not a bit. It's inflated. So there aren't as many voters in Armenia and so on and so forth. So you can see that this is like a legal challenge which is not going to in any way have an impact on the election. And you realize, right, that it's been 3 weeks now since the election, and we still don't have a government. So these are all interesting developments. And one final point, I also found it interesting that some of the judges, there's actually one judge, Hovik Bedrossian, who actually expressed concern that some of the deliberations about this issue have been taken place outside of the court. So she wanted to make that sort of clear, and she wanted to bring it back in the within the purview or within the context of the Constitutional
Yeah.
Court. And there was, I wouldn't call it a spat, but there was some give and take between Hovik Bedrossian and the president of the Constitutional Court, Arman Dilanyan.
Arman Dilanyan and also Vahe Grigoryan. You mentioned that Haray Tomasyan wanted to invite Armen Sarkisyan twice, but the majority, I guess, of the others decided to reject that motion. Why was he being invited? What was the motive for inviting him?
And also, what was the
That's
reason for rejecting the motion?
They
Well,
didn't
the
give a
second
reason,
question
though.
is
Yeah,
easier.
yeah.
No, there was actually. They said that Haray Tomasyan actually had two requests for that. One of them, it was an issue of an article that he had utilized.
So let me give the background. So the first time that Haray Tomasyan raised the motion, this was when later in the evening the other constitutional court members met in the chambers outside of the public purview and voted against it based on Article 52 of the Constitution. But Arevik Petrosyan and Hilary Tomasyan did not attend that meeting because they believed it was unconstitutional, and that was what Arevik Petrosyan's allusion was, that some of the decisions were being taken outside of the court, because according to the new constitution, any electoral challenge needs to be heard publicly, and the I believe Tomasyan and Arevik Petrosyan believe that also includes all of the adjunct motions related to this. So the second time, Haray Tomasyan
Right.
publicly said, okay, well, if Article 52, if you're denying that motion based on that, even though I disagree with that you held it outside of this meeting hall and everything, he said, I'm basing it on Article 55 now, and that one was immediately rejected on the spot, and no explanation was given.
With one caveat, Hovik, Haray Tomasyan mentioned that there was a technical problem in the first request. Maybe instead of writing it another 555,
No, it was basically
mistake put 50.
Article. The technical problem, I believe, was that Article 52 versus Article 55, and that was so. He said
Right.
like if the problem is the article that I'm making reference to, I'm changing my motion, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
but again, going back to the issue, why was Armen Sarkisyan's testimony important in your opinion?
I don't think it's important. The thing is that there cannot, again, going back to Armenia's government system and so on, the president is, a toothless, powerless entity. And basically, they were trying to, probably this might be an attempt to challenge the call for the snap elections, and also continuation of Pashinyan as an acting caretaking government, uh, because that's what, at the end of the day, the president is the one who would sign this. So they were trying to, use an indirect method to challenge Pashinyan's call for the snap election, but also him remaining in power as a caretaking government, without realizing that, again, the president is obligated to sign everything that's put in front of him. He doesn't have any power, but it's a strategy. I think it's an interesting strategy. And also, don't forget, we don't have precedents in this government system. We do not have a precedence on how to operate these things, for better or worse. Up until 2017, you knew who had the responsibility, or who would carry the responsibility of a decision. It was the president, the alpha and the omega,
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
in the political system.
And
But
Asbed,
now there are so many players.
you said that the president has to sign all these things. He doesn't have to sign, but then it's toothless, right? Because there's a certain period of time beyond which it goes forward.
Right, exactly. That's what I meant. You're absolutely right.
Well, the president has one explicit power in the Constitution, which is to appoint the date of the elections, right? And I believe the reason they wanted to ask him and maybe I'm mistaken, but the reason that I wanted to bring him in was because it was Nikol Pashinyan who met with the two opposition forces, and apparently they agreed on the date, and he announced the date on his Facebook page. Whereas, the president had liberty of like selecting any time in a 45-day range for the elections, but basically
Right.
afterwards, right? The president
Yeah.
appointed the same date as Nikol Pashinyan did on his Facebook
Right.
post, right?
Hovik, I would just say this is the political equivalent. This is the political equivalent of tomato, tomato. I mean, at the end of the day, he could have just delayed it by a week or 5 days or
Right.
pushed it forward by a couple of days. At the end of the day, the office of the president in Armenia is completely irrelevant. As it was mentioned by some analysts, one analyst close to the president a couple of years ago, that the role of the president in Armenia, it has much less power than the Queen of England. So, and we
Right.
know how powerless the Queen of England is, regardless of what we think of that. So,
Yeah, and I think, to be
basically,
fair, I think the opposition was saying that could the date have, setting the right date would have changed the outcome of the elections, and I think
yeah.
that's the so if the opposition had more time to campaign, for instance, which I think
Hmm.
Kotchikian said in a speech on I think June 30th, where he said, we didn't have enough time to campaign in the regions. But yeah, I agree that, I mean, the elections would have happened anyway, but the main theme, and I think that this is more important than what happened during election day, is all the stuff that preceded the election day, which was the allegations that Pashinyan had an unfair advantage because he just basically went around saying, having these quote meetings with the prime minister, where he was actually basically effectively campaigning, or at least that's what the opposition alleges. And since he knew when the date of the
It's a
elections would
fine
be for
line,
sure,
Hovik. Sorry to
before
interrupt
anyone
you.
else, right?
Sorry, Hovik, to interrupt you.
Yes.
But then this is the other thing, right? Even in countries like in the United States, an incumbent president, when running for a campaign, there is a clear-cut difference, or there are regulations as to, can you make campaign calls from the White House or not, for instance. And we know that Trump broke that mold, but even in the United States, where
Right.
there are clear-cut regulations about it, it becomes murky. It becomes a
Sure.
huge,
Sure.
large
Sure.
gray area to do that, let alone in Armenia, which is, again,
Yeah.
experiencing this
And
for
these
the
are
first
part of
time.
the whole administrative resource business.
To close off this discussion, if the results are essentially upheld, what do you think is going to happen in a parliament where one of the leaders of the faction, called the other an SOB, where they're threatening each other with violent, terminology that I haven't seen anywhere. It seems to be pretty disconcerting that with all this built up in rhetoric that is centered on animosity. What do you think is going to happen in parliament once these people start working together?
Well, there's an assumption here in your question, Hovik, that they are going to work with each other, right? The civil contract has already a majority quorum that can run. There are issues of who's going to take their mandates, who's not, right? If Batibunem is going to be there, if Kotchikian is going to give up his mandate, well, he will, and so on and so forth. So it all depends on all of those factors. But I think they're going to just bulldoze their way through.
There is no contention that a civil contract will be able to will have a majority. There is a question about constitutional or supermajority, which there's also clear ability for the opposition basically to refer everything to the constitutional court. So does this mean that if they don't work with each other, basically they're going to refer every single law that's passed to the constitutional court, delaying basically they can make life hell for a civil contract if they
Right.
want to, and
See,
they can
there's a
slow things
term for
down.
this, Hovik. There is a term for this. As much as we've heard a lot about the politicization of the judiciary, but there is the reverse norm as well in different places. It's used in academic articles and so on in research. It's called the judicialization of politics.
Right.
So, we probably might see that going on, and this might also give Pashinyan with the new government the push to actually either pack the court, the constitutional court, or to find a way to actually control the decisions made there.
All right, so let's talk about the next topic, which is Pashinyan's promises of forging steel out of velvet. More specifically, it was repeated during the campaign that, and symbolized by the hammer he was wielding left and right, that Pashinyan promised that post-election would witness the rise and implementation of the steel revolution, as opposed to velvet. And sure enough, we have been witnessing some manifestations of that promise. Especially in the form of persecution and prosecution of local government representatives, mayors to be specific, and all mostly focused around the Sunni region, and some military personnel. In fact, last week we saw General Khachatурov, who is the commander of the Third Army Corps of the Armenian Armed Forces. His contract was not extended, and it was widely sort of leaked or alluded that this was political in nature. His Third Army Corps is responsible for the Tavush region in Armenia, which is some of the areas that where this talk about enclaves is going to be happening if it goes forward. There was another general in Sunik that was released of his duties, and he gave an interview where he said it was for political purposes. And also, basically, almost all the mayors in Sunik are essentially in targets right now. Many of them, I think, Arush Arushanyan, the mayor of Goris, has more than 30 criminal cases on him. There have been allegations of corruption. I mean, it's all to me, it's all like Pashinyan style. Right now, it's all talk in terms of the cases, but whether any of these will come to fruition as a verdict remains to be seen. But they are definitely being used as an element of putting political pressure. At least that's what the opposition sees as the sole reason for these criminal cases. What is your thoughts on this? The details can be distracting, but what do you think
Yeah.
things? How do you think things will play out in this area?
You mentioned it, Hovik. I think this is one of the things. It's not just about the stylization, if you want to call it, of the revolution, but also one of the statements that Pashinyan made about there would be a cadre sort of massacre of cadres, and so on. And I think the focus is in Sunik for many reasons. Don't forget that one of the junior partner in the Armenia alliance was the Resurgent Armenia Party by
Right.
Hagopian, who's there, and also the fact that Sunik has become, rightfully so, the concerns and so on and so forth. There, it can be a hotbed for opposition or the flag bearers of anti-Negolism in Armenia. And I think this is a way that he's actually changing the cadres. Maybe this is also a good opportunity for him. This also can be challenged legally, right? If an acting prime minister or an acting government can do all of these changes that they can. That's why, again, the battlefield is in the judicial field, about the courts and so on and so forth. But this is an attempt to prepare the groundwork for the military as well as administration, and probably down the line in other government agencies as well, to set the ground for the relaunching of Pashinyan with Pashinyan 2.0, not necessarily better, improved, or without bugs, but it's just the Pashinyan 2.0 government. And his ability to be able to control any and prevent any possibility from the military specifically to oppose him, as well as from the local governments. This is another thing, by the way, that we don't talk about a lot, but according to the law, according to the constitution, Armenian local governments in Armenia yield a lot of interesting autonomy in many respects. The problem is that they have never utilized it. So this could be one of the ways that Pashinyan is consolidating his next 2, 3, 4 years, however long he will be in power until the next elections, and calming or pacifying sort of the situation.
Yeah, personally, I wish some of that steel was applied to at least saying something when your enemy invites, 40, or was it more than 30 ambassadors of regional countries to Shushi to celebrate,
They said 100.
Armenia's massacre there, and
Right.
Ukraine. I mean, that last week, that was a few days ago, and I saw this tweet from the ambassador of Ukraine to Azerbaijan. It's really disconcerting. He was like giddy, saying, his dream has come true. He has visited Shushi, and not a single word from Armenia on this.
Look, Hovik, this is the other thing that we mentioned in the first question that we talked about Pashinyan and Armenia's alliances and or the perceptions that we have. This is the reality of politics. This is the reality of international relations. Azerbaijan won. Azerbaijan has much more to offer to most of the countries in the world than Armenia has anything to offer to even a single country. So obviously they're all lining up. And they're trying to appease Aliyev, and they're trying to get whatever piece of the action that they can get their hands on. So that's the reality. Now, to sit there and argue, oh, how dare they, we were allies, we were friends, and so on. This is the thing that we need to think about,
No,
and
well,
this is
I
what
mean,
I'm worried about. One second, Tovik. I'm not arguing against you. Actually, you will like what I'm going to say, I'm guessing. The problem here is that the problem here is that you do not have the means in terms of a foreign policy establishment to have an active play an active role in basically neutralizing these countries. If you had an active diplomatic corps in some of these capitals, it would have been easily influenced, like for say Ukraine or this or that country, that the ambassador of that country in Baku might at the last moment catch a cold and not be able to go there. And this is the nature of politics. This is the nature of diplomacy, not politics. And that is something that Armenia in the last 10, 15 years, I would say, mostly has, and especially in the last 2 years, 3 years, has failed miserably and
Asbed,
utterly.
you're expecting for the ambassadors to say something, but there's not even a foreign ministry in Yerevan.
Exactly. No, that's what
right.
I meant in terms of a diplomatic corps to have some kind of a direction from the central institution, right? In this case, the foreign ministry.
Yeah. I mean, I have a quick question for you. Regarding this issue, does Artsakh even come in as a factor in Armenia's political calculations at this point?
Not at all.
Do you think Pashinyan could ever visit Artsakh again and assure the Armenian population that Armenia stands with them, or at least hasn't forgotten them?
Nope. I don't think that is going to be a possibility, because that might also be one of the reason or one of the things that Azerbaijan might have say, no, you cannot, Armenian, officials cannot visit Artsakh and so on. But see, the election results. I mentioned this in another talk of last week or so, that Karabakh is not a factor in Armenian political landscape anymore. We saw this in the election results because most of the people actually decided to ignore it. And at the same time, I think, as we mentioned before, Karabakh is not in the purview of Armenia anymore. Karabakh's security, Artsakh's security, Artsakh's guarantee of security is not in the hands of Armenia, and it's not a factor at all in Armenian politics
Mm-hmm.
or any the politics of any government that might succeed, Pashinyan or otherwise.
Well, I mean, I disagree with the otherwise part. I think that, at least publicly, for instance, a leader of Armenia that cared about Artsakh or its population or about the 30-year legacy could have, just complained. Anyway, I mean, I realize the real part of this, but
Right.
Armenia has diplomatic levers. Even if Pashinyan thinks he's the sole he's the foreign ministry, the law enforcement and everything else in all in one. He should have then taken the role of
Hovik, if a
issuing a
different prime
complaint.
minister had been elected who hadn't lost the war, maybe they could have said something.
Said something, I would agree, but the question is action.
Look at Azerbaijan. In 1994, they lost, and they never sort of agreed to anything except a temporary ceasefire, and they used every opportunity to complain. Every
Yes, but
single sort
Hovik,
of visit.
Haidar Aliyev did not lose the war.
Yes, he did. Actually, when he joined, he has some losses before he was able to stop things. Even stop the
It's
losses. There
true,
was
he inherited the tail end of that war, but anyway.
But I agree. I mean, all I'm saying is that an Armenian leader needs to stand up, even if it's realpolitik is against us right now. You are setting a precedent for a very bad future if you're accepting all this trespassing of our rights, in Artsakh, and it seems like the international community is happy to play its role in this game that Azerbaijan is playing.
Okay, so as we close our topics here, today completes a year since we started these podcasts. Our first episode was dated July 12th, 2020, That's the day that the Tavush border skirmishes began and lasted 4 days, coincidentally. Actually, there was a test run episode that we had recorded on July 5th, but we never published that. We didn't have our act together. Anyway, the coincidence of starting our show on the day of the Tavush incident put a spin on it. Our initial intention, of course, was for a political show, and so not only did it become politically focused, but it also became very war focused. We were barely thinking of moving on to routine topics of governance such as economy, trade, health, education, and so on, that the second war in Artsakh broke out on September 27, and we're still living the aftershocks of that event. Um, Hovik, I remember the first time you came to me and said you want to start a podcast, you want to start talking about these things, not just posting and sharing. And initially, I was a little apprehensive about it because I had no idea about the technologies. You said, oh, it's easy. There are services to do this, to edit that, whatever. And we finally got our act together and we started doing the show. And do you want to say a couple of words about our initial intent with this show, and how do you see that things have panned out over the past year?
So my initial intent, I guess it arose all the way back in April 2018, when I found myself aggressively posting things about the ketogenic diet and how it might affect cancer rather than what was happening in Armenia. And I realized that I was sort of, trying to, ignore the situation there. And one of my friends, actually, who was a supporter of the Nikol Pashinyan, was very upset with me. He said, Yerevan is burning, and all you can do is post these things about the ketogenic diet. And you know what? It took me about 6 months to firm up my own sort of willingness to publicly politically on politics in Armenia. I normally
Mm-hmm.
my Facebook and Twitter feed was there before that was focused around information security, family pictures, and so forth. But essentially, I think my intention was to present as much as I can what I saw was the truth, what I saw was going on, and a more balanced representation of information. And frankly, yes, I mean, those who know me know my political leanings, but I think what we tried to do with the show was have differing points of views present. I think it was successful in that aspect. But what I was hoping to do was to get to some of my friends who I couldn't engage on social media. A lot of people were pretty set in terms of their support for this or that political party.
Mm-hmm.
But I was hoping to actually get to a lot of my silent friends and some my silent part of my social network who is still silent.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I think I have failed in that. You can, I guess, you can shout from the mountaintops, but if no one wants to listen, and that's, I think, very troubling in terms of Armenian society in general, because we're seeing after this war, especially, a lot of people basically going, radio silent on and not caring about what's going on in Armenia. I still want
Well,
to change
I'm
that.
not sure they don't care. It's just that a lot of people have a very silent mode on because of the last year of events in Armenia have not been very happy ones.
Yeah, you're right,
Right.
and I think that it's not that they don't care, but but I think it's still important to keep a good focus on the right information and
Yeah.
balanced, information. But at the
When
same time, I want to say that we've discovered a lot of other people who listen to this podcast and who are interested in what we have to present. So that's the positive side that I can
I agree
talk
with
about.
that one. I mean, we've totally expanded the people that we've talked to, and we have so many more people in our circles and networks and everything. Now, coming back to when you talked to me initially about specifically a podcast, right? You said you want to do a podcast rather than anything else. Uh, I once we agreed that we were going to do something like that. I talked to Asbed Kotchikian here with us, and he was very enthusiastic. I remember our call suddenly went from a 15-minute conversation to I think we were on for a couple of hours, and our cell phones were juicing out. And he was very excited about it and said he wants to be part of it. And I know Emil was also. Asbed,
Yeah.
what do you remember?
Yeah, my memory and the excitement at the time was, as Hovik mentioned, in a different direction, right? I was about to get ready to go to move to Armenia, and I've studied and follow Armenian politics, for decades now, as part of my interest,
Yeah.
but also as a political scientist. But at the time, my main concern was that there is no substantial level of political analysis in the form of a weekend review and so on. And that I felt that the Groong podcast could fill in that vacuum. My concern, looking back to last year, you said, you mentioned it, Asbed, we just coincided with one tragedy after the other, right? We had the COVID cases, then we had the Beirut explosion and the Armenian community there, and the war, and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
And that also, I think, one of the biggest problems I've seen in the last year, well, not politically, but in terms of related to our podcast, is that the number of political analysts, everyone and their grandmother and grandfather became a political analyst
Hmm.
in this context. And I think, again, call me biased, but I think Gurung podcast has been able to bring in a good mix of different perspectives, issues, and so on. And but in that context of everyone shouting, everyone who has a more follower on the social media and so on, they've been drowning it. And I think that is the major
Hmm.
challenge in front of us as well, going into the second year, as to how can we continue to shift through the this sort of static, if you want to call it,
Yeah.
and name calling and name blaming and so on and so forth, intolerance and whatnot. It's just to how to bring in civilized discussion.
Now
And I
I.
think one of the niches, sorry, Aspect, one
Mhm.
final thing, and one of the niches that the Groom podcast had, and we have to go back to it as well because we were consumed with the war and after the war and so on, is having
Yeah.
conversations that we had one on one or with a panel on different issues, be that regional politics, about economic issues, about things that are not necessarily part of the hot topics per se, but at the end of the day, they shape Armenian life, Armenia's
Absolutely.
life, and Armenian life.
I hope that conversations will continue and possibly even accelerate because there are so many interesting topics. There's more to us than just the wars and stuff like that. Before we talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to mention that the four of us that were the mainstay. We also had Alan Zamanian, who was with us in the first few episodes, and then was busy. But Hovik, myself, Asbed, Kotchikian, you, and Emil were the four mainstays who were constantly in dialogue. It's really too bad that Emil is not with us today. I would love to hear his feedback also. But Asbed, what do you look forward to when we think about year two of our show?
Oh, so many things, so many challenges in terms of, again, going, when we've
Hey,
had
it's an
this
open
argument,
script.
yeah, we've had this, not argument, but maybe even disagreement, maybe that we've had in terms of my approach has been to also to deal with more meta level issues, rather than details. And I
Hmm.
know, we've had back and forth about this. And I think we need to talk about existential issues. And I'm not talking about the meaning of life kind of an existential issue. I'm thinking about more, for instance, what should an education system be in Armenia? What can we learn from other cases, other examples? What is the gold standard for a country like similar to Armenia and how to move forward? What is the economy supposed to be? What are the specific issues in terms of investment, encouragement, investment?
Yeah.
I know this is a topic that has been harped upon a lot, but diaspora Armenia relations and so on, but in more details, right? Macro, but at the same time focused discussions. And I think that's what we need to move forward. That's not only for as a we need. There are a lot of people who want to be relevant without being useful. And I think Gurung can be the Gurung podcast in a format that can discuss these issues is both relevant and useful looking ahead. And I think that is the key thing. Everyone who talks is going to be relevant, but they're not going to be useful. And this is the niche that we are well positioned to fill in, to cover, and look at those different issues. Again, break those molds about alliances or this or Russia is a friend, Turkey is an enemy. Well, again, having all of those, but these are beyond that,
I
beyond the
understand.
rhetoric.
Yeah, it's not the realm of an analyst to be that judgmental. It's actually more of a understanding of the situations. Hovik, what are your thoughts about year two?
Well, I hope that we continue our podcast. I don't see any major changes. I think that what we've been doing has been useful to this to whatever the niche of people that listen to our podcasts. I wish we could have as many views as some of the other sort of outlets out there. I think a lot of it depends on how sensationalistic and how emotional we get.
Yeah.
But I think that we have the right balance right now. What I would like to possibly try out is actually giving our analysts and giving our guests and ourselves as well maybe a little bit of space to express their own opinions more than sort of being or trying to have the role of a
A
moderator.
personal rant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we were talking about after every show having like a couple of minutes for a soapbox or a rant.
Micro conversations, maybe. Like
Mhm.
5-minute conversations, one on one or one on two, and just basically free format conversation. Just record it.
Sure, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
those are all interesting things. I think what we need to do is more also on the technical side and get our podcasts in front of more people.
Yeah.
So in case anyone hears this and wants to help out on advertising or SEO or giving us ideas on how to do that, we'd appreciate that. We often don't have enough time in the day to even record this podcast and then sort of have it out in front of everyone. So we I frankly don't have time to think about okay, how we could have
One
more
of
readership
one
Mhm.
of the
or
things I know
viewership.
that Emil was thinking about when we started the podcast is that he said, "I just want to get on with some friends on the weekends and say anything I feel like and I want to." And he's been able to do that because I've heard from some of our listeners and they say, that guy sounds like he just says whatever comes to his mind, and it's great because it's unfiltered and there's not a lot of hypocrisy on this show. I agree
All
with
right.
that. Of course, we can say anything we want on this show because nobody listens to us.
Or nobody listens to us because we say whatever is in our mind. See, that's also another thing. But Asbed Bedrossian, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts? You've been asking the question. What are your thoughts about year two?
Well, I think that we do need to pick up some of the conversations because as much as I love the politics uh, in Armenia, around the world, in the United States, like I said a little bit earlier, I think that there's a lot more to Armenians than just politics. We have great culture, we have great people. We want to know what people are doing and start talking to them, right? We want to hear about Armenian technologists, Armenian comedians, Armenian authors, filmmakers, and just basically bring out what is the reason why somebody would want to be Armenian is important to
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And the
And
format is also
mhm.
important because we do want more audience here. And sometimes maybe an hour is too long to listen to. Maybe sometimes the right thing is 20 minutes. I'm not sure what those numbers are, but I think it'll be good for us to experiment a little bit and see how we can increase our audience.
And I have to say one thing for our listeners is that, as much as, we're talking about team and so on and so forth, I mean, this podcast would not have been possible without the diligence and dedication of both Hovik and Asbed Bedrossian, both in terms of editing, technology, but also coming up with the topics and also getting in touch with the people and so on, and the constant editing and preparing and unlike what you might think, a lot of thought and a lot of prep goes to preparing all of these, and
and
I just
and
want to
and same with
acknowledge
you,
that.
Asped, and also Emil.
Uh,
Many people might just get from what you said. Many people might get the impression that you come on the show for an hour and you talk and you go, while Hovig and I are doing a lot of editing. There's a lot of editing and everything, but I know that you diligently prepare for these conversations. So you want to know what the topics are because you're going to go and make sure that you know what to say, how to answer certain issues and stuff. So it's not like one of these things where the guests are just waltzing in and
mhm.
shooting off their mouth and disappearing. There's a lot of research that goes behind our conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I just
Yeah.
also like to add that what I liked and what I could like to continue seeing is that we've had a lot of guests on our podcast that are traditionally outside of the realm for diasporan based podcasts in terms people from Armenia and maybe more content specifically in Armenian, and having guests that normally don't appear in
Right.
diasporan based
And that's the
shows.
challenge, right? I think that's one
Yeah,
of that's one of
absolutely.
the other discussions we had about whether or not to have the podcast in Armenian as well as a variant, because that can actually also increase the number of guests, but also the audience and the range of the topics to be discussed.
And another area is, I think, to bring out more diasporan topics as well. In which case,
Right.
there's a world of languages that we need to think about. Thank you, Asbed, and thank you, Hovik. We close the show with that.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org, or on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.